Have you ever been sitting around a fire at night and mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-story, you just stop? Something at the edge of the light catches your eye, or a sound comes from the trees that doesn't fit, or the fire does something fires don't do. And for just a second, the whole comfortable world you'd built around that circle of warmth gets smaller, and the dark outside, it gets bigger. That's the thing about campfires that nobody says out loud, but everybody knows. The fire doesn't actually protect you from anything. It just shows you exactly where you are. And everything outside the light knows where you are too. Tonight I have 3 stories, all of them starting at a fire, all of them ending somewhere the people who told them to me didn't expect to end up. Turn something off that's making background noise, get comfortable, and let's begin. I want to be precise about the order things happened, because the order is what makes this what it is. And if I get it wrong, you'll think it was coincidence. You'll think we were suggestible, spooked by a campfire story and reading things into the dark that weren't there. So I'm going to be precise, and I'm going to let you decide what to make of it at the end. My name is Vera. I'm 32. This was 3 summers ago. 4 of us camping on private land in rural Tennessee that belonged to Danny's family, 200 acres of mixed hardwood and creek bottom that had been in his family for 3 generations. Completely private, no neighbors within earshot, the nearest paved road about 4 miles down a gravel track. The group was me, Danny, Lucia, and Pete. We'd all known each other since college. Comfortable, easy. The kind of group that doesn't need to fill silence. We'd been camping on this property before. It was a regular thing. Danny's family used it for hunting in fall and let him bring friends in summer. We knew the land reasonably well. We were not out of our depth. Fire going by 7 p.m., dinner done by 8:30. Drinks open, conversation easy. The specific loose warmth of people who've known each other long enough to stop performing. Around 10 p.m., Lucia said she wanted to tell a story. Lucia was the storyteller of the group, always had been. She had a way of building things slowly and then landing the end with a precision that left you sitting in silence for a second before you recovered. We'd heard her tell a lot of stories around a lot of fires. She said she'd heard this one from a friend of a friend, someone who'd supposedly experienced it. She wasn't vouching for it, just passing it on. She started, the story was about a group of campers, 4 of them, she said, 2 couples in a remote wooded area. First night out, fire going, drinks open, everything comfortable. Around midnight, one of them notices a light in the trees at the edge of their campsite. She paused when she said that, let it sit. None of us said anything. I looked at the tree line out of reflex, the way you do when someone says the word light and trees in the same sentence at night. The tree line was dark, nothing there. I looked back at Lucia. She kept going. In her story, one of the 4 campers gets up to check the light, walks to the tree line, finds nothing, comes back. They decide it was an animal's eyes catching the fire. They settle back in. Then a few minutes later, the same light again, in the same spot. At this point in the story, Pete shifted in his chair. I saw it. A small physical adjustment that wasn't about comfort. And then, and this is the part I need you to hold on to, because this is where the order matters, Danny said quietly, without pointing, without drama, just quietly. There's something in the trees. On our left side, maybe 40 feet out, at the exact edge of where the firelight reached and the dark began. A light, low, dim, stationary. We all saw it. Lucia stopped talking. There was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where none of us said anything, and we all just looked at the light in the trees, and it sat there looking back at us. Then Pete said it's probably an animal. Danny said, yeah. Lucia said that's what they said in the story. Nobody laughed. We sat with it for another 30 seconds. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, didn't advance. Then it was simply gone. 1 second there, next second not. Danny said, see, animal, reflective eyes in the firelight. Lucia said, should I keep going? We all said yes, because what else do you say? You don't stop the story. Stopping the story feels like admitting something you don't want to admit. She kept going. In Lucia's story, after the second light sighting, one of the 4 campers hears footsteps on the far side of the camp from where the light was. Slow, deliberate, circling the perimeter of the fire's glow. She was 3 sentences into describing the footsteps when Pete held up his hand. He said, "Stop." Lucia stopped. We listened. From the right side of camp, the opposite side from where the light had been. Slow, deliberate, the sound of something moving through dried leaves with weight and intention. Circling. I want to tell you what I felt in that specific moment, because I've thought about it many times since, and I want to describe it accurately. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the specific disorientation of 2 things happening simultaneously that have no logical connection. A story about footsteps and footsteps. A story about a light and a light. The feeling of a frame being placed around your experience by something outside you. The feeling of being inside a pattern you didn't choose. That feeling is more disturbing than fear. Fear at least makes sense. Danny stood up. He said he was going to check the perimeter, because that's Danny. Practical, physical, the kind of person who investigates rather than sits. Lucia grabbed his arm and said, "Don't." He asked why. She said, because in the story, the person who goes to check doesn't come back. He said, "Lucia, it's probably a deer." She said, "Probably." He sat back down. We all sat there for a moment, listening to the movement in the leaves slow and then stop. And the fire crackled and the trees were dark on all sides. And Lucia said, "Do you want me to finish?" We said yes. I don't know why we said yes. I genuinely don't. But we said yes, and she finished the story. In the final section of Lucia's story, the 4 campers in the story, spooked, exhausted, fire burned down to coals, decide to stay put until morning, and the night passes without further incident. And in the morning they find, at the edge of the campsite, boot prints in the soft ground circling the perimeter. Not animal tracks, boot prints. A person had circled their camp at close range in the dark while they sat at the fire. Lucia finished, let the silence sit, and then said, "End of story." Nobody responded for a moment. And then Pete said very quietly, "We should check the perimeter in the morning." We did. I want you to know we did. First light, all 4 of us with Danny's dad's dog, who he'd brought on the trip, and who is a good tracker, on the right side of camp, in the soft, dark earth, near the creek, where the footsteps had seemed to be moving. Boot prints, circling the camp, stopping at one point and standing for what looked like a long time, the print deeper in the heel from sustained weight, before moving on and disappearing into the leaf litter toward the tree line. I've turned the question over 1,000 times since. Did the story somehow pull those events into being? Did something in the dark hear the story and choose to perform it back to us? Or was there simply a person in the woods who happened to be circling our camp at exactly the same time? Lucia was describing a story about a person circling a camp, and we noticed it because the story told us to look. I don't know. I genuinely don't know which of those explanations is worse. What I know is that a campfire story about 4 people in the woods ended with boot prints in the morning, and we were 4 people in the woods, and we found boot prints in the morning. And Lucia hasn't told a campfire story since. None of us have asked her to. I've asked Fiona about that night maybe 20 times in the 2 years since it happened. And every single time she gives me the same answer, which isn't really an answer at all. It's nothing happened. We just got tired. Go to sleep. She says it the same way each time, the same words, almost in the same order, which is the specific quality of a rehearsed answer. Fiona doesn't rehearse things. She's the least guarded person I know. When she uses a rehearsed answer, it means she's made a decision. And she's made a decision about this. So I'm going to tell you what I observed, because I can only tell you what I saw with my own eyes. I can't tell you what happened at that fire between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. because the people who were there decided not to tell me. And they've kept that decision for 2 years. My name is Aaron. I'm 36. Fiona is my wife. Seth and Gwen are our closest friends. The 4 of us go on one camping trip a year together as a kind of standing tradition. Different location each time. Always good, always easy. This was 2 years ago, Labor Day weekend, a campsite in a state forest in upstate New York that Seth had booked. A beautiful spot, drive-in access, fire ring, a creek about 100 yards down a short path. I'd been fighting a headache for most of the afternoon. Not a migraine, just the dull, persistent kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything slightly too bright and slightly too loud. By 9:30 p.m., it was still there, not worse, not better. And I made the call that I was better off in the tent with some sleep than sitting at the fire feeling mildly awful. Fiona asked if I was okay. I said yes, just tired. She said she'd be in soon. I said goodnight to Seth and Gwen, zipped the tent, took some ibuprofen, and was asleep within 20 minutes. I woke at 3:07 a.m. The headache was gone. I felt clear. The kind of sharp, clean awake you get when your body has fully processed whatever was wrong with it. I was genuinely comfortable, but I was also aware that I'd slept without drinking enough water in the evening, and I was thirsty enough that going back to sleep wasn't going to work. I unzipped quietly. Fiona wasn't in the tent. I wasn't surprised. She stays up late naturally, and I'd been asleep for 5 hours. So I grabbed my water bottle and walked toward the fire ring. I heard them before I saw them, which was normal. They were talking. And then I came around the slight bend in the path that brought the fire ring into view. And here is where I want to be very careful about exactly what I saw, because I've replayed it so many times and I want to describe it precisely. Fiona, Seth, and Gwen were sitting at the fire ring. The fire was very low. Coals mostly. The kind of fire that's been burning down for a long time, with no one adding wood. The light it gave was minimal, orange and dim and close to the ground. All three of them were facing the fire, not talking, not anymore. By the time I came around the bend, whatever conversation I'd heard had stopped. They'd heard my footsteps on the path, and they'd gone quiet. I said, "Hey." 3 faces turned toward me. And here is the part I've thought about the most. The part that woke me up in the middle of the night for months afterward. And I want to be careful, again, because I don't want to overstate it. Their faces were the same faces. Fiona's face, Seth's face, Gwen's face. Nothing was wrong with their faces in any specific way I could point to, but the expression on all 3 of them was identical. Not the same emotion, not like they'd all been told the same bad news and were all sad in the same way. Something more specific than that, and something harder to name. The closest I can get to it is this. It was the face of a person who has just seen something and is still in the process of deciding whether they believe they saw it. All 3 of them, the same face. I said, "How long have you been out here?" Fiona said, "A while." I said, "It's 3 a.m. She said, "Is it?" Which is not how Fiona talks. Fiona says, "What? Seriously? Already?" She doesn't say, "Is it?" I said, "Are you guys okay?" Seth said, "We're good, just getting cold, probably time to go in." He said it looking at the fire, not at me. Gwen didn't say anything. She was looking at the tree line on the far side of the camp. Not nervously, not scanning, just looking at a specific point in the tree line the way you look at something that was there and now isn't, but you're keeping your eyes on the spot anyway, just in case. I looked at the same spot, dark trees, nothing visible. I asked Fiona directly, just the 2 of us, walking back to the tent while Seth and Gwen did the fire. I said, "What happened tonight?" She said, "What do you mean? Nothing happened." I said, "You all looked wrong when I came out." She said, "We were tired. It was late." I said Gwen was staring at the tree line. She said she does that. Gwen does not do that. I've camped with Gwen 6 times. She doesn't do that. I said, "Fiona." She looked at me, and for just a second, 1 second, her face did the thing again. That specific expression, the face of someone deciding whether to believe what they saw. Then it was gone. She said, "Nothing happened, Aaron, let's sleep." I lay awake for a long time after that. I listened to the tent, to the sounds outside it, to the creek in the distance, and the normal ambient, non-threatening sounds of a forest at 3 a.m. Everything sounded normal. But here is what I couldn't let go of. Lying there in the dark while Fiona breathed beside me with the specific, deliberate evenness of someone who is not asleep. Whatever happened between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. at that fire ring, all 3 of them had agreed not to tell me. Not individually agreed, not separately decided, agreed. The identical expression, the same rehearsed quality in their answers, the way Seth looked at the fire instead of me when he said, "We're good." That's a group that has made a collective decision. In the 5 hours I was asleep, Something happened at that fire, and the three people who were there sat around the low coals in the cold at 3 a.m. and looked at the tree line and decided unanimously, without consultation in front of me, that I wasn't going to be told. I've asked Seth twice, separately from Fiona. His answer is the same as hers. I asked Gwen once. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Aaron, it was just a weird night. We're all fine." And then she changed the subject with a precision that told me the conversation was over. The thing I keep returning to is the word weird. She said it was a weird night. Not a quiet night, not a long night, not a forgettable night. Weird. Which means something happened that was outside their normal frame of reference. Something that registered as unusual enough to be called weird in a moment of slight guard drop. Weird. And they all sat on it. And they're still sitting on it. We've done our annual trip every year since. Same group, different location. The fire goes until midnight, sometimes later. Nobody goes to bed early. Seth always has more wood than we need. Always. Even when I offer to gather some, he says no, he's got plenty. And we always have a very good fire that nobody lets burn down to coals. That's new. That started after the upstate New York trip. I've never mentioned it to Fiona. I've watched it happen 3 years in a row, and I've said nothing. Because some part of me understands, without being told, that whatever happened in that fire ring while I was asleep is why we don't let the fire get low anymore. And whatever I'd learn, if they told me, I'm not sure I want to know. I'm not sure I've ever actually wanted to know. I need to tell you about the 30 seconds first, because everything that came after, everything I'm going to describe in the rest of the story, only makes sense if you understand what 30 seconds of complete darkness feels like when you're not expecting it. We'd been at the fire for 3 hours, comfortable fire, well built. Rico is particular about fires the way some people are particular about cooking. He'd laid it carefully, and it had been burning steadily all evening with no drama, no flare-ups, no dying down, just a clean, reliable, constant heat. There was no wind. There was no rain. The fire went out, not gradually, not burning down the way a fire burns down when it runs out of fuel. Out. Like something had decided it was done. And in the second it went out, in the moment between fire and dark, I heard something I've never been able to fully describe. Let me try. My name is Tess. I'm 30. Rico and Blair are my oldest friends. The three of us had been doing an annual camping trip since we were in our mid-20s. A tradition we'd kept through jobs and moves and relationship changes and everything else that makes your mid to late 20s feel like a spinning plate. This was 2 years ago, a site in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, mid-October, deep fall color, cold at night. The kind of camping that requires a real fire and real layers and feels earned in a specific way that summer camping doesn't. We'd had an excellent evening. The fire had been everything. The kind of fire that becomes the center of gravity around which the whole night organizes itself. We were on our second round of drinks, deep into conversation, one of those nights where time moves differently. It was around 11:30 p.m. The fire went out. The first sensation was visual. One moment orange and warm, and the world made sense. Next moment, a darkness so complete it felt physical, like something had been placed over my eyes rather than simply removed from the environment. When you've been sitting in firelight for hours, your pupils adjust, they stop working hard, the fire does the work. Take the fire away suddenly, and you are genuinely completely blind for the first seconds. Complete dark, 3 seconds, 4, 5. Somewhere in those 5 seconds, before my eyes started doing anything useful, I heard it. A sound from the tree line directly in front of me, where I'd been facing all evening. And I want to be precise about what kind of sound, because this is the part I've tried to describe to other people and always struggled with. It was not a footstep. It was not a branch. It was the sound of something exhaling, slowly, with volume, with deliberateness, the way a very large thing breathes out when it relaxes, the kind of sound that implies size and proximity and presence. One exhale, clear and close, in the dark, directly in front of me. And then Rico said, "Where's the lighter?" And I heard him moving in his chair, and then there was the flicker of the flame and the lighter caught, and he held it down to the fire and the logs caught and the fire came back up. Small at first, then real, then bright. 30 seconds, start to finish. The fire came back up, and I looked at the tree line. Trees, dark, exactly as they had been all evening. Nothing visible, no shape, no movement, no eyes catching the light. Rico said, "What the hell was that?" Blair said, "I don't know, it just went out." I said, "Did you hear something when it went dark?" Blair said, "Like what?" I said, "In the trees. When it first went out." Blair looked at the tree line, then at me, then at Rico. Rico said, "I was looking for the lighter. I wasn't paying attention." Blair said, "I heard something, I don't know what." I said, "Big exhale." From right there, I pointed at the tree line in front of us. Blair said, "Yeah, maybe." Rico said it was probably a deer startled by the fire going out. We sat with that for a moment. Nobody said it was definitely a deer. Here is what changed after the fire came back up. And I want to be specific because this is where the story stops being about the 30 seconds and starts being about the hour that followed. The fire was fine, burning well. All the physical reality of the situation was restored. 3 people around a fire ring in a national forest on a cold October night, completely normal. But the dynamic of the group had changed. In a way, I'm going to try to describe carefully because it's subtle, and subtle things are easy to dismiss. Before the fire went out, we'd been in conversation, flowing, easy. The kind of conversation that doesn't require thought. 3 people who know each other well enough that talking is just another way of being comfortable together. After the fire came back, every sentence required a small effort. Not because we were scared, not because we were distracted in a way we could name, just the ease was gone. The thing that makes conversation between old friends feel effortless, whatever that is, had been disrupted. Like a signal interrupted and restored, but slightly off frequency. Rico would start a sentence and lose the thread. Blair would respond, and the response would land sideways, not wrong, but not quite right. I'd say something, and there'd be a half beat more silence than usual before anyone replied. Small things. All of them small. None of them individually notable. But they continued for the full hour. We sat at that fire after it came back up, and they hadn't been there for the 3 hours before it went out. Around 12:30 a.m., Blair said she wanted to go to bed. I said, okay. Rico said he'd stay up a little longer. And here is the thing that caught me, the small thing that sat wrong in my chest when he said it. Rico never stays up alone at a fire. He's the first one in at any camping trip we've ever done. He gets up early and he goes to bed early, and he has never once stayed at a fire alone. I said, "You sure?" He said, "Yeah, I'm good." Blair and I went to the tent. I lay there and listened. Rico stayed at that fire for another 40 minutes. I heard the occasional crack of wood. I heard him moving his chair once. And once, around 1 a.m., I heard him say something. Not to Blair or me. We were in the tent. Just a single sentence, spoken at a normal conversational volume, addressed to whatever was outside the fire ring. I couldn't make out the words. I've asked him about it since. He says he was talking to himself. He was tired, and he does that sometimes. He says it like he believes it. I'm not sure I do. In the morning, over coffee, we were all slightly subdued in a way that none of us addressed directly. The specific quiet of a group that has all experienced something and is collectively deciding to let it sit. I looked at the tree line while I drank my coffee, the specific spot in front of my chair, the spot I'd been facing when the fire went out. Clear daylight, October colors, totally ordinary forest. I walked over to it anyway. I don't know why. Just walked over and stood at the edge of the trees and looked at the ground. The forest floor was thick with fallen leaves, dry and deep, the kind of leaf bed that holds impressions. There was a depression in the leaves, large, roughly circular, maybe 6 feet across, directly at the tree line. The leaves were pressed down the way leaves press down when something heavy has been standing on them for a sustained period. Something that size, standing directly in front of where I'd been sitting, in the dark. For some portion of the 30 seconds or possibly longer, I've thought about what was in the depression in the leaves. I've thought about the exhale, how close it was, and the fact that the fire went out with no wind on a calm, still night with a full wood supply. I've thought about Rico staying at the fire alone for 40 minutes when Rico has never once stayed at a fire alone, and about the single sentence he said in the dark, and about who or what he might have said it to. And I've thought about the hour after the fire came back, how off frequency everything felt. Like 3 people who knew each other perfectly well were suddenly slightly out of phase with each other. Like something in those 30 seconds of dark had gotten between us in a way that took the rest of the night to wear off. We've camped twice since, different locations, different forests. Rico builds excellent fires, always has, but now he builds them larger than necessary, and he keeps wood stacked close. And whenever we're at the fire and conversation lulls, he leans forward and feeds it without being asked. He doesn't let it go below a certain height. He doesn't let it get low. I've never mentioned that I noticed some things you notice and you hold because the person doing the thing is already carrying something about it that you can't see and don't need to add to. Whatever Rico knows about what was at the edge of that fire in the dark, he's already living with it. That's enough. Before I close tonight out, if this is your kind of thing, if you've been here for all 3 of these and you're still thinking about which one got to you the most, hit subscribe and drop a comment right now telling me which story stayed with you. Was it the story inside the story coming true? Was it the 3 people who decided together not to say what happened? Or was it the 30 seconds in the dark and what used them? Tell me. I read everything. Now, here's the thing about a campfire that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I started collecting these stories. We build them for warmth, for light, for company, for the oldest and simplest reason in human experience. Fire means you're safer than the dark. But every single person in these 3 stories was at a fire when it happened. Not in the dark, not alone in the woods without a light, at a campfire. Vera and her friends were at a fire when the stories started coming true. Aaron's group was at a fire when whatever happened to them happened. Tess was at a fire that was burning beautifully, full and steady and reliable, and in the 30 seconds it went out, something used the dark. That's the thing nobody tells you. The fire shows you where you are, and everything outside the light knows where you are too. It's always known. Good night, sleep warm,